let's start now, and I want to share my PowerPoint now with you. And here, let's make it bigger. Yeah, okay. So what I said I would do here is comparing the wearing of face masks in response to COVID-19 with the wearing of face veils worn by some Muslim women for religious reasons. I use memes and cartoons to explore the breaking down of barriers, hopefully in a humorous way. And of course, I want to look ultimately at the importance of bodily practices in Islam and Christianity. So when I show you this picture here, it shows two women wearing a burqa. And the one on the left says, the last thing we needed. Are we allowed to laugh at this? We'd like to have your responses. Are we allowed to laugh at such a meme as Christians depicting Muslim women? Is it politically incorrect? Did you simply have to laugh when you saw it? Or not at all? So I would like to know from you. Can I have some responses? Yes, please unmute yourself before you speak, and otherwise, please try to keep yourself muted. Okay. Jeanette, would you like to respond?
Oh,
Unmute. Okay.
well, I just wanted to say, yes, I did laugh. And I laugh at a lot of things, some of them inappropriate, but I laugh. But then I thank you for your question, because it did make me think.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, what I thought is that for many of us, the wearing of a mask was obligatory. We were required to wear a mask. And in the same way, some of these women may be required to wear certain clothing, not by their choice. So there is a mild similarity for us who have to wear the mask in an obligatory way. It's temporary. We expect we won't have to do that forever. So anyways, those are my thoughts. Oh.
Yeah, no.
Here,
Jacqueline.
I think I'm muted now. Okay. Oh, am I mute? Yes, I need to unmute. No. Can you hear me? Now you can hear me. So can some others maybe respond to, are we allowed to laugh at this? At a meme of these two burqa class women who struggle wearing now, on top of the burqa, they're wearing now a face mask. What does the meme also say about the Muslim women? How does it present Muslim women? And yeah, what does it say about them as well? Is there anyone who wants to respond to that? And why did you laugh if you laughed? Does anybody want to respond?
Well, I had to laugh because the women seem to say themselves the last thing we needed. It's kind of funny they say that. So that's why I laugh. But when I thought about it a little bit now, when you asked this question, can we laugh? Then to me, it doesn't feel like something I cannot laugh, but on the other side, I could cry, because if I think of the Afghan women who are now forced to wear all that garment, and then on top maybe the mask, then it's, well, you can cry about it, but it's still funny, that picture. Yeah, that meme.
Yes, of course, we don't want to laugh at Muslims ever, but maybe we can sometimes laugh with them. So yes, we should never take ourselves too seriously anyhow, I believe. Anyhow, to go to the next slide here, and now my PowerPoint doesn't work. Here, let's see. Okay, here. How do you, I have another question. How do you feel about Muslim face veils? This is a niqab. And here you have this, actually this picture was made in Germany, in Munich. And it shows in a busy area in the public space, 3 Muslim women in totally veiled in black. 2 of them even wear gloves and I suppose socks as well. How do you feel about when you encounter such Muslim women in the street? What does it make you feel?
If I may.
Yes.
So for me, I spent some time, 3 months in Yemen. And I was there for an internship, and it was a good experience for me to be in a society where this is the general dress of women. And I was wearing this as well. It was some kind of protection for me, and I felt I blended into society. Also, I could walk around freely without having a foreigner, another Yemeni man with me all the time. So it was freedom. It's difficult to understand. If I see it in Munich with my German background, of course it is weird. But from my personal experience, I am not as against this as I was before, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing this. Yes, any other response, please?
I was wondering if I might be permitted to ask Lydia a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so you found it to be a form of freedom. If you were to walk around without such dress, what would happen?
I'm just taking off my headphone because I hear the German translation and it's a bit complicated. So nothing would happen. I would have been free to walk around normal, and there were other foreigners and foreign women who did so, and there was nothing happening, at least while I was there. In that context, it was for me more relaxed. So I was obviously a foreigner anyways. People could tell I'm a foreigner from the way I walked, apparently. So it was just a way for me to be by myself, because foreign women were advised to always go out with someone from their work or a colleague. And so, yeah, that was just my way of blending in. Nothing would have happened. Others did it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so for you, I'm trying to paraphrase you, it offered security, freedom. Now, often in the West or in non-Muslim countries, women who wear the face veil are not really liked. And some people feel fearful when they see such people. And it's sometimes argued that the face veil hampers good communication, that it is a sign of women's submission, if not oppression, and especially also a security threat. That is often quoted as well. And again, to stay a bit humorous here, I don't know if you've heard of Shazia Mirza. She's a British Muslim comedian who operates in the public sphere. So we are allowed to laugh at her jokes because she operates in the public sphere. She says, when I first traveled to America, I got on the plane with my burqa on, and this woman refused to sit next to me. So I said to her, I am going to sit on this plane and blow it up, and you think you're going to be safer 3 rows back? And, and so she clearly underlines the security threat that a woman with a face veil can give, can make people nervous around her. This meme here is this cartoon is very different, for it shows, it underlines the patriarchy when it comes to women's dress. Here it's in French. The man says, he calls somebody on the phone and says, "Ah, je te dis pas comment il fait chaud ici." I can't tell you how hot it is here. Okay, he is in a t-shirt and in shorts, and it looks summerish and quite cool. Whereas his wife is clearly sweating. She's in total black, which attracts the sun and makes it even hotter, and she carries all the bags. So this one rather underlines the patriarchy. It's only women who cover themselves like that. Men usually are a little bit freer. Now they would also follow certain norms, but on the whole, they are freer. And on the whole, in the West, but not only in the West, as we will see in a moment, in many parts of the world, there is a certain reluctance, especially for face veils. This sign here comes from Australia, where a community obviously rejected or didn't want women wearing burqas amongst them. And so we have over the last decades in quite a few countries, burqa bans that have sprung up. And in several European countries, some African countries, and in Canada, in Quebec, and also in some Asian countries. And they seek now to exclude Muslim women covering their faces in public spaces. Yeah, again, okay, here. This map here shows you the extent of burqa bans in the world. It's not totally accurate insofar as you see in West Africa, the country of Senegal is, it says it bans the burqa in public places. Senegal was only discussing it in 2015. It didn't actually institute the ban. But France was the first country where in 2010, it made a ban on women wearing a face covering. And then we have Belgium that followed, and then Bulgaria, Chad in Africa, Congo, Gabon, and then in Africa, and then Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, and in 2021, even Switzerland. But then there are other countries like Tajikistan, we have Tunisia, Algeria, Sri Lanka, etc. So you see, it's not just a Western problem. There are countries all over the world that are reluctant to embrace people that wear a facial cover. And in several of these countries, it happened in result of bombings, but not everywhere. And as you see also the bans, sometimes in public spaces, sometimes only in certain localities, or a ban in Morocco and Spanish Sahara, we have a ban on the sale and manufacturing of the veil. And then also in the purple countries, a ban in some public buildings or in the public work place. Now in Canada, it's only in the French-speaking areas in Quebec where it's forbidden. I suppose Quebec is in close relation with France, whereas the rest of Canada does not disallow burqas. Anyhow,
Jacqueline?
Yes.
I thought that in Holland, in the Netherlands, I thought it was only forbidden in public buildings and places and not at the whole, but maybe you are more better information.
In the Netherlands, I understand since 2019, and
yes.
the indicator says here ban in public places.
Okay.
So they can wear it in the streets.
In the street, yes. Okay, yes. I confirm. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
But the map might not be totally accurate either. It's the best I could find. Now, strangely enough, even though the burqa, and obviously many people struggle with the burqa because as I said, lack of communication, or they see women wearing the burqa as security threats. There is a whole genre of burqa jokes that, of course, plays on the anonymity of the burqa. And I want to give you some examples of this little booklet here where Simona Bassano di Tufiglio made some illustrations, just that you get a little bit the feel. It plays, of course, with the idea that women's hidden eyes, you know, what can they do? So they are in French, so I will translate them. So the one on the right says, on se connaît, and the other one says, well, de vue. So the one on the right says, do we know each other? And the one on the left responds, yes, from seeing each other. And of course, this we have to laugh, because how can they recognize each other since they wear a burqa, is the idea. Or here, the one on the left says, tu es qui toi? And the other one says, ta sœur. So who are you? And she says, I'm your sister. So you don't even recognize your own family members under the burqa. It's implied. This one I like very much, and I find it rather funny. The one on the right says, tu as l'air en forme. You look really good today, or in this, you know. And of course, the burqa conceals the form. And so that's why it's supposed to be funny. I hope you can laugh a little bit. This one also I find rather cute, where one of the sisters wants to take a pictures of the other ladies, of the other women. And so she shouts to them, souriez, smile, because she wants to take a good picture. This one here is also cute, but it's actually a little bit terrible, because we have here a little child in the middle of these burqa-clad women shouting, Maman, where are you? And obviously the illustration wants to point out that a child cannot even recognize its own mother because they all look the same. Now, I have been told that this is actually not the case. Little children do recognize their mothers, even if they wear niqab or are totally covered all in the same way. Maybe they smell them. It's from the way they walk, from the way they move, maybe the shoes, or well, the way, as I said, the way they smell. So children usually know exactly which person they have to run towards if they need a little comfort. This one here, it's the lady on the right says, Pardon pour le retard, je ne savais pas quoi me mettre. Excuse me for being late, I didn't know what to put on. So she is late because she didn't know what clothes to put on. Again, this makes us laugh because we think, well, she's just wearing a black overcoat. This one here, we have a young man who wants to meet, who is excited about meeting a young woman. So he says to her, salut, comment tu t'appelles? And she answers, et si j'imitais la voix de ma grand-mère? So basically he says, hello, what's your name? He wants to initiate a conversation. And she is thinking she can play a little bit. And she says, what if I would imitate the voice of my grandmother to maybe trick him or something? And here another one from Shazia Mirza. She says, I don't know what the big ideal is. All the women in my family wear the burqa. It's great because they all use the same bus pass or the same bus ticket. Now, of course, what this shows is that with the burqa, you can trick. Several people can use it. And she speaks about it being rather economical because the whole family can use the same bus pass or bus ticket. In other contexts, she speaks about all the family using the same passport because who can recognize them? This one here is also quite special. One man says to his fellow friend, tu ne sais jamais si ta femme est en train de t'observer. You never know if your wife is trying to observe you. And this one is in particular important because it underlines that anonymity gives the woman power and their eyes cannot be controlled. So the gaze of the masked woman can even be to some extent threatening. It is not for nothing that this scene is labeled psychological terrorism. It evokes, it makes us laugh because it confounds the notion that the burqa renders women powerless. Here, it's the burqa-clad woman who is the powerful one. Now, Shazia Mirza says again, tells about her life. My parents are both Muslims and they are very religious. My mother wears the burqa mainly because she doesn't want to be seen with my dad. In another occasion, she's asked, why does your mother always walk 5 steps behind her husband, behind your father? So she answers, well, because he looks better from behind. And then she's asked, well, why is it then that in Afghanistan, women walk 5 steps before their husbands? And she answers, well, it's to detect the landmines so he can walk safely. So that is, of course, a little bit cynical. Here, I can't even see the top here because of the, anyhow, it says, the one on the right, it asks why, underlines that women need to wear the burqa to protéger de la tentation les yeux des hommes. Women need to wear the burqa in order to protect the eyes of men from temptation. And then the one on the right says, mais il serait plus indiqué que ce soit les hommes qui la portent, puisqu'en burqa, on ne voit rien, pas même un accident. So she's saying that it would be better if the men would wear a burqa, for if they would wear burqa, they wouldn't see anything, and they wouldn't be tempted, okay? They wouldn't see anything, they don't even see accidents. So this is underlining again, if men would wear burqa, then women would be freer, and because men wouldn't see much. Now, Shazia Mirza is again rather pragmatic when it comes to the burqa. She says, I used to put on the burqa when my hair was greasy. I could not be bothered to wash it. So sometimes women who wear the hijab also make such, say this, that they don't need to spend so much time beautifying themselves. Now, actually, quite often burqa and niqab are mixed up or confused with each other. And for some reason, we talk about burqa bans, when on the whole, it's about the niqab that is discussed. So the burqa is really a full body cover that covers the entire face and has a mesh screen covering the eyes. Whereas the niqab, as you can see in the middle picture, is a veil for the face and the eyes remain visible. So the difference between the burqa and the niqab is that the burqa has a mesh over the eyes, whereas the niqab does not. And the hijab is just simply a scarf that covers the hair, the head, and the neck, as you can see here. Now, most women, the burqa is mainly worn in Afghanistan and maybe the north of Pakistan, but really, I've never seen a woman in the West wearing a burqa. But we talk about burqa laws in many countries. The niqab is worn by very, very few women on the whole in the West. And the hijab, it's the hijab that the majority of Muslim women wear. And some, we also need to keep in mind that some Muslim women do not veil at all, arguing that the Muslim sources, textual sources do not require it. And so we always need to keep that in mind. Not all Muslim women veil, and there are good theological reasons for not veiling as well. Now, women, of course, they say that they benefit spiritually from covering themselves. So we will look into that later. Now, I have a question for you again. Has the wearing of face masks for COVID changed your attitude towards the wearing of face veils? Have you ever made the comparison? Have you ever, since, you know, now COVID is a little bit past, but have you ever made a comparison? Never. We have Jeanette's husband who shakes his head. What about Lydia? Have you ever done it? No?
I think Marit wanted to speak.
Okay, Marit, yes, please.
Well, I didn't think a lot about it, but I had both thoughts. Sometimes it was too hot underneath the mask, and I, compared it to the bothering of wearing more. But I also felt sometimes the advantages of being hidden underneath the mask. Even the mask is not very big. I felt like people do not recognize me. I can just go in my old garment, quickly shopping and not change. So I felt a little bit the advantage with which Lydia pointed out earlier.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's not strong, but it's a little bit of this. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I of course want to start comparing the two a little bit, and we know that women who veil, they do believe they benefit spiritually from wearing the veil. They demonstrate their inward dedication to God outwardly by covering their whole body. And so veiling is a marker of piety. So Muslim women, by and large, or usually veil for religious reasons. There are other reasons as well, and often it's quite complex. But on the whole, veiling is a marker of piety. It's how you express your religion outwardly. And of course, people who chose to wear, and it was of course mandatory in many countries, or it became mandatory in many countries during the lockdowns. They wore the face mask to protect themselves and others from the spread of COVID-19. And so it's kind of like for the public good, one could say. Mm-hmm. Now, as Lydia said earlier, because veiling signals piety, we could go back here, and modesty, veiled women in some Muslim countries suffer less harassment in public than unveiled women. And so the veiled body actually gives a certain freedom of movement. Conversely, in the West, veiled women, especially women who wear niqab, thus the total face veil, they often attract attention, a lot of attention, because it signals something alien or something that is other, and indeed no longer offers the same protection than they would experience in the Muslim world. And so veiled women, and especially niqabi women, report being harassed physically and being physically abused on Western streets. Now, has COVID changed this? And at the time of the lockdown, there was some positive impact of COVID-19. One British woman who wears niqab said, for example, "There is a marked difference to the way I'm being perceived. Nobody is giving me dirty looks because of my gloves and my covered face." So she perceived that the face masks that people wore to disallow the spread of COVID really changed the situation and made it far more positive for Muslim women wearing face masks. A Pakistani woman said, "I think that this gives everybody the opportunity to step into our shoes for once." She also was very positive about it and felt that it really helped people understand them better. So it is, when we look at it from that point of view, it is remarkable that COVID-19 has people in Western countries covering their faces and changing their perceptions of face coverings. What was resisted on security grounds is now encouraged for the common good. So, you know, the niqab has often been resisted on security grounds, and now face veiling or face covering is encouraged for the common good. So it has, in some way, in one article I read, niqabi women overnight became experts in face covering. Now, of course, a niqab doesn't cover the face in the same way as a good face mask does, but still the face is covered. And so that changed the situation a little bit. A leading Indian British American scientist said that that not wearing a face mask during the COVID situation was antisocial, in the same way that drunk driving or failing to wear a seat belt when driving a car would be. And so for him, the antisocial had become social. And one Canadian Muslim scholar wrote, "We have all become niqabis now." And I put on purpose a little bit of a provocative picture here. We have all become niqabis now. All of us are wearing face veils. And as this British American Indian scientist said, the antisocial has become social. Now, of course, the Canadian Muslim who wrote that we all have become niqabis now, she then also points out to the hypocrisy of many countries, for their face veils were forbidden in some places, and I showed you the map earlier, and yet these countries encouraged face masks. So, for example, this could lead to a catch-22 in France. You could be fined for wearing a face veil of a face covering, and you could be fined on public transport for wearing a face covering and for not wearing a face covering. So it could become tricky. Now, of course, we can laugh about it or cry, I suppose. We always have this the choice of these responses. Now, the question is, will this more positive attitude towards face veils last? And Elizabeth Boucard, I'm quoting her here, she's a professor of philosophy and religion at Northeastern University in the US. She wrote, "While I would like to say yes, I don't think this will be the case. Banning face veils in the West has been about gendered Islamophobia. It's not really about covering faces. I think most non-Muslims will not make the connection that face veiling for religious reasons and public health reasons both depend on ideas about the common good, and that they are both motivated by ethical concerns, even if those concerns are, of course, different. At least that is the connection they won't make without actually learning more about religious modesty." She then goes on to distinguish religious and health reasons for covering the face. But she sees both motivated by ethical concerns for the common good. Now, how so? How are face veils and face masks both motivated by ethical concerns for the common good? She says face masking reduces the spread of COVID-19, and the veiled Muslim woman upholds the propriety of the public sphere with her modesty. So both of them have ethical concerns for the common good. Now, when COVID in 2020, when COVID started, especially in Italy, and it's in Europe, at least in Italy, was the worst outbreak, and then spread to different European countries from Italy onward. The fashion industry also then caught up with the imagination, or the niqab somehow, or the face mask caught up with the imagination of the fashion industry. In February 2020, as COVID began to take its toll in Italy at first, we have at the Paris Fashion Show, the Italian fashion designer Marine Serre who came up with the fashion designs that very much resembled, in my opinion, a burqa. So on the left, you have face masks. Her models are wearing face masks. And on the right side, it looks that to me, it looks like a burqa, to be honest. So she clearly must have been inspired by these rather severe types of face masks. Definitely stylish, but I don't know who will wear them in the public street, in public spaces. Then, of course, there is also a Muslim fashion or pious fashion that is available. It actually, you know, after the 1970s, 80s, 90s, many Muslim women in the Arab world returned to the veil, whereas in the 1950s, hardly anybody wore a veil in some Muslim countries like Egypt. But in the 90s, there was a big return to the veil. And first, this was seen as economical because it was cheaper. It was seen as alternative, as trend setting, as religious, as giving freedom of movement because of harassment otherwise. And so it was seen as very positive, as liberating. But then, of course, after a while, the Muslim fashion industry was developed, and nowadays you have the Muslim fashion industry is a multi-dollar business, and you have Islamic catwalks. It's this one in Turkey, or this one in Indonesia. Indonesia, the Mennonite World Conference is taking place in Indonesia. Indonesia is big into the Muslim fashion industry. And we can say that Muslim or pious fashion is clothing that has an ethical and religious dimension. It's supposed to lead to character formation through bodily action or through bodily expression. And of course, it's supposed to regulate sexual desires. And it's to create a public space organized around Islamic moral principles. The Muslim fashion industry, critics of the Muslim fashion industry say, is it a form of Islamization of the public space? And they wonder and think that it's sort of, argue that it's an Islamization of the public space. But there are also many people who really like Muslim fashion, especially in the West. They connect it with creativity, with freedom. And they argue, or the question they wonder, is it a form of integration of Muslims into non-Muslim societies? Because young Muslim women often do not then buy so-called Muslim outfits, conservative, straight Muslim outfits, but they shop in the high street and through layering of regular dresses that they put together, achieve the Islamic standards that are demanded of what is to be covered and what not. And so we have here different people arguing this is actually a good thing, or because it's creative, it brings freedom, or then we have a few people who also see it as a form of Islamization of the public space. Now, of course, we can ask, is fashion about creativity and freedom? Because after all, fashion always covers or follows norms the industry sets. We can discuss this later. This cartoon is interesting here because we have the woman on the right that says, you must be so restricted and uncomfortable, to the woman on the left who wears a niqab. And the woman in niqab says, I am. And I've only been wearing them for 20 minutes. So here we have a Western woman who thinks the niqab must be so restrictive. And the Muslim woman wearing niqab, lifting her niqab a little bit to reveal red stiletto shoes that she finds very restrictive. And so, the niqabi woman thinks nothing or how should I say? She doesn't think the niqab is restrictive, but she thinks The red shoes are restrictive. Her fashionable shoes. Here, another one by Shazia Mirza. She says a lot of women think the Western feminists thinks these women are repressed. They should see what they got on underneath. And of course, the previous cartoon illustrated that. In this little cartoon, you have the woman on the left saying, "What's under your niqab?" And the niqabi woman responds, "My face." "What's under your makeup?" And the veiled woman here points to the fact that makeup can function as a type of mask. One observer says makeup can be used as a mask to hide insecurities and shame that people feel about their face, and perhaps even how they feel about themselves in general. And makeup, like other forms of masking, can both hide and reveal and provide a measure of control and protection. So we can say about these two cartoons that ultimately it was easier to see masks on others than to see our own masks or our own restrictions. We live so much in them that we don't even realize them. Amal El-Ajmi is a Kuwaiti artist, and she made this picture here depicting a woman in niqab and a man wearing a head covering and then a beard, and over that he's wearing a face mask. And she says, it says in Arabic, "Zaman niqab al-rijal, zaman corona." The era of men wearing niqab is the era of corona. So when she's in Saudi Arabia or Yemen, as Lydia said before, the niqab is quite, for Arab women, quite mandatory or quite, a must. So she's arguing with this picture that the corona time, it changed this. Now for the first time, men look like niqabi women. Look at the Saudi man there. Or the man with the head covering and the face mask. And for the first time, men have to step into the role of women covering their faces. Now, she painted her picture in response to a tweet, a Saudi tweet, which advocated the wearing of niqab as mandatory for all Muslim women. This was a man who was quite conservative and believes, obviously, that all Muslim women should wear niqab, whereas many Muslim clerics argue that the niqab is not mandatory and the hijab is sufficient. Now, the tweet stated that people are racing to buy masks to protect them from corona, while Islam discovered the treatment 1,400 years ago when it ordered the wearing of niqab as a protection against viruses. Now, this is, of course, quite an anachronistic modern apologetic. The niqab wasn't developed again as a protection against viruses. Rather, it was to protect public space for men so they can be at ease and not be sexually tempted. Now, this tweet went viral, but was deleted a few days later because it was criticized very much. And her painting was done in response to that. I like this picture very much. It's made by a Moroccan. And it tells the story of two Moroccan women who drank tea every day together. And when Corona came, they weren't allowed to drink tea anymore. So they came up with a very creative solution. As you see, the one in the upper floor pours tea into the glass of the woman in the lower floor. And so through their creative way, they can still share tea together. And of course, in some countries, you actually try to pour the tea with elegance, sort of from up high, to make foam. because that's how it's drunk. So anyhow, she's successful as making foam. These women do not wear niqab. That is a traditional veil worn in Morocco only. This picture was made by Ishraq Bouzidi, and she entitled it "Confinement Story." So close, no matter how far. I want to end this presentation asking us, or how we can use the Corona crisis, other crises as well, to build bridges of understanding, just like these two neighbors in this drawing. And of course, allow that to include some good laughs about our own veiled selves. And here I have some questions that I would like to discuss. Maybe you can have stories yourselves of how humor has brought people together across religious lines to overcome adversity. And in what ways has Christ broken into your own fears or traumas? And then another one here: Muslims challenge Christians to mark male and female space in ways we might not be comfortable. What might we do about it? And then, as the last question I would like to discuss is, should we mark ourselves as Muslims do? How do we live our faith in our bodies? Or how are we embodied? You know, is our faith embodied? What might be a Christian response? So let's discuss this now. Does anybody? Yes, Lydia put the questions in the chat so that we can discontinue the PowerPoint and see each other as we discuss it. What do you think? Does any of the questions speak to you, or what have you experienced? So,
I will read the chat, the post in the chat that was posted by one of the interpreters, which is not being translated. So Wolfgang writes, when I was young in the 50s and 60s, all women going to church in all denominations wore either hats or scarves.
And of course, the Mennonites, especially, you know, who are related to the Amish, and we also have some conservative Mennonite brothers and sisters. They, of course, wear a type of head covering until today. I don't know if anybody of us has such background or has lived in such a community.
May I say something? So in our church we have a learn house. I don't know if that's a real English term is, but we had a presentation of someone who studied the violin. So wearing a viol, and she did a presentation of the past. My mother were also so on her head when I was young. How do we call that? My English is not so good, but yes. That's what. Yes. So the elder persons always, when they go outside, they were that, and but more in the past, also men and were for their faces all things of getting not for the hair or for other things, they wear some veils. So it is, yeah, I think it is a little cultural problem from having the meeting with another culture, and we find it strange, but it is in the past it was normal that men or women had veiling things under the head, so we make it too much special. And the other thing I want to say is that I hope I can tell it good. I was in the tram in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, we have 150 nationalities, and I was in the tram, and a woman with a niqab was sitting there, and the man with not the most modern clothes looked very much at that woman, and the women asked, "Why are you looking at me?" Now, yeah, your clothes is a little bit strange. And she said very accurately, but you are also, you are not getting much public also. So when you are in a theater, so she want to give him back. What is now so special about you? You are also not so special. So I liked it, and most people must laugh, because it was so accurately how she responded at that person. So yeah, so that's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I had a slightly tangential remark. It has always struck me as strange that one of the purposes of the veil or niqab or whatever is to protect men from sexual temptation. And I recall as a child being taught not to stare at things that were different, not to stare at someone. And in English, we have these special words to ogle someone or to leer at someone, meaning to stare at a person in a non-friendly way. And as a child, I was taught not to stare. Don't stare at someone. So the idea, and you know, in the West, women run around without any protection on their faces and clothing, and they are not regularly harassed. That somehow men are taught to restrain their sexual temptations. So I've wondered whether there's a hypocrisy there, that somehow men are so weak and so poorly taught that they can't control themselves in the presence of a female shape or a female view. Oh my.
Yeah, that this is something that the Moroccan sociologist Fatima Menisi talks about. She talks about public space being male space. And she talks about women being very highly respected as mothers, as sisters, as daughters within the private sphere, within the family, and with a legitimate sexuality as well. After all, a woman can get a divorce if she's not sexually fulfilled or if her husband is impotent. That is, the Hanafi law school only allows 2 reasons for women to get a divorce, and that is one of them, although that might only be at the time of marriage. But in the public sphere, it's the woman is supposed to tone down her sexuality, because men are perceived as very weak. A man cannot but give in to temptation. And so That's why women, that's why there is segregation, and veiling is sort of a symbolic segregation, one could argue. And there is a hadith, and this is because she argues Muslim female sexuality is so strong. And there's a hadith that has become a proverb that says, whenever a man is alone with a woman, Satan is a third. So when you are moving around, I'm sure Lydia is aware of that, when she was in Yemen, that you try not to be alone with a man in a room, because he might understand that as an invitation. And so women carry the bigger share of that. And here we have Caitlin, who also writes in the chat, often Christian girls or women are told they need to dress certain ways so as not to tempt men. Some women do this voluntarily, though many are told by parents, youth pastors, mentors, etc. There is not necessarily a specific clothing item associated with this, but Christians often see clothes as similarly tied to piety. And so clothes is for women specifically, she's meaning. So you argued that it's not the same in Western societies. Now, Caitlin is arguing that even in some Christian settings, that might be the case.
We have our nuns, so the nuns they are wearing also a sort of niqab.
Yes, and I remember one Muslim woman in Scotland who took a public transport in Scotland told me that some man came up to her in the bus and said, "So nice to meet you, sister," and he thought she was a Catholic sister. So sometimes they can look similarly, and especially, of course, in the Middle East, Christian women traditionally have also veiled. Like in Egypt, Christian women veil, especially farmer women, but not in the cities, there they don't. And of course, in the 19th century, Christian women also wore a face veil in Egypt and places like this. But apart from now focusing on Muslim sexuality and this kind of thing, what might be more interesting to talk about is how do we express our faith? How do we express our faith in a bodily way? Do you do certain things? Do I make sense? Or maybe go back to the questions here. Or can you share stories of, let's read them again, share stories of how humor has brought people together across religious lines to overcome adversity. Humor, of course, is very important also for cultural learning. I remember before I went to the Middle East, I was told, especially with language learning, you need to learn to laugh about yourself, and then it will go easier. But then in what ways has Christ broken into your traumas and fears? And of course, COVID in many ways has been a heavy load for many people. And now again, the third one is again, Muslims challenge Christians to mark male and female space in ways we might not be comfortable, but what might we do about it? And should we mark ourselves as Muslims too? How do we live our faith in our bodies? What might be a Christian response? So think about these questions a little bit, and I'm sure many of you have much to say about this. Let's think a little bit about it. Or other questions you raise, yes.
I'm just reading one comment from the chat from one of the interpreters. There was a ruling that people had to wear masks at Carnival season in Cologne and Germany.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here we have somebody else who joined. Here, let's just put the questions up again so you can see them as well. So with COVID, for the first time in recent history, we have nation states who now mandated the wearing of face masks in the same way as Iran, for example, imposes the hijab or the chador for studies that proved the face.
Also ich denke, wir brauchen keine neuen Regeln, sondern wir sollten mit Respekt reagieren. Wir sollten uns bewusst machen, dass das vielleicht einiges anders interpretiert wird, als wir es gedacht haben, und sollten auch mehr Verständnis haben. Und zumal möchte ich sagen, so toll sind die westlichen Männer nicht mit weggucken und nicht an sexuelle Sachen denken, wie du das dargestellt hast.
Okay, so we have another a comment here from Lydia. Here, let's look here.
I was just trying to translate what was being said for those who don't understand German, because you have to repeat what they said or translate it into English. As far as I understood, they said that we don't need new rules, but we should have more understanding for others. And the way you put it of the assumption that Western men are very good at looking away is not the case. So it's a bit romanticized, and they wanted to challenge that.
Actually, there is a verse in the Quran that says that men should lower their gaze and women should lower their gaze, and so there wouldn't be problems if everybody would follow that rule. But it's obviously not always the case, although many people certainly do that.
You mentioned that some countries mandated the wearing of the mask, but in various countries there was also pushback against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like in the UK, the government for a very long time was against face masks or did not encourage them. And I hear in the US there is a lot of resistance, and people just sometimes just really didn't believe that face masks would do any good medically, but then also they felt their freedom was somehow curtailed. And at the time, I was sometimes quite surprised with how strong certain reactions were, that people would just refuse to wear face masks, when actually, medically speaking, I do believe that they actually do help the spread of COVID. Not all face masks to the same degree, but like the FF2 that is worn in Berlin, in Germany, they are definitely quite good. So some of you live in the US, you have experienced that more than me.
Ich meine, also ich bin sehr traditionell auch christlich erzogen. Ich kenne auch noch viele Diskussionen um Kleider und Hosen. Aber ich denke, es gibt auch bei den Christen eine ethische Grenze über Kleidung. Wenn ich mir dann einen Jugendkleider anhöre, der sagt, oh, diesen Sommer muss ich aber wieder viel Fleisch angucken. Und die westliche Mode finde ich nicht unbedingt, was ich jetzt dann immer christlich sehen würde. Also bei uns ist ja auch schick etwas mit sexy assoziiert, auch speziell in der Topmode. Und da würde ich auch eine gewisse Grenze christlich sehen. Also ich meine nicht Gesichter verschleiern, aber ich kann es ein bisschen nachvollziehen. Ja.
Mhm. Ja.
Ich will die Grenze nicht sehen. Ich will auch nicht über Klamotten diskutieren. Aber ich kann es schon ein bisschen fühlen.
If I may translate that into English again. She said that also with Christians there is a set of understanding of what might be ethical dress code. So in haute couture, in the high fashion, sexy is chic. But in her opinion, there is also limits to that of how far clothing could go or should go.
I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania area where there are many conservative Mennonite groups. And most of those women do wear some head covering. And I have observed, and I've heard some of them comment, how that they can relate more easily to Islamic women because they're wearing a head covering. And I think in our communities, people are more tolerant of seeing Islamic women wearing head coverings because they are familiar with the head coverings that Amish women or conservative Mennonite women wear. But for many in the community, wearing a head covering is not necessarily seen as advantageous. It marks people out as belonging to a certain sect, but it doesn't necessarily point them to Jesus, the one we are called to follow.
You're raising many points here. Often people who move to the Muslim world will wear more conservative clothing because your reputation is at stake. And if you want to be a witness for Christ, you cannot wear the latest fashion or like what Cornelia shared. You have to be careful of how you present yourself to be taken seriously. Many Muslim women talk, of course, about Muslim women having dignity, whereas Western women do not have dignity because they show too much of their flesh. So here the question is, again, how do we follow Christ in an embodied way so that our witness can even be perceived, can even be understood by other people? Now, Webster asked here, he says, it's very interesting learning the beliefs of other religions. I'm wondering how they get attracted to each other for those who want to get married. Well, I mean, that is, of course, very dependent on context. In some conservative societies where there is total gender segregation, marriages are arranged and you don't meet your prospective husband until the wedding night. Or you might meet him before and have some meeting, but always with a chaperone, so that you are never alone. And there is in Islam or in Muslim societies called what is called a mahram. A mahram is a man that is so closely related that he cannot marry you. And women are safe in traditional Muslim society to go out with a mahram only. A man so closely related that he's not a threat to her, okay? And so she can also unveil in front of a mahram. Now, in most of the Middle East, in the big cities of Cairo and Beirut and Amman and all these places, people go together to school, they go to university together, and so they mix. And so, of course, they get to know each other in different ways. And in many modern families, they wouldn't have arranged marriages. The young people meet each other, and if the families are seen as being compatible, then there is the notion of kafa'ah. that means that you need to have the same background in religion, in class, in what I forget now. There are 5 points. So basically you marry somebody of your class, and if the families then agree, you get married. And of course we have, then you have, yes, Webster, can you actually talk and explain your question better?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, according to your explanations, it is very understood, but my concern was the way they dress. You know, for someone to get married to someone, there must be an attraction. You see her face. That is the way we get married to each other. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's easy to answer, because to be honest, girls who wear veils, they're very attractive, and they put their veils on in beautiful colors that match their skirts, and they're very attractive with that. Just because they put on a veil doesn't mean that they are not attractive.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so
Okay, so
Khaled from Bammental.
Ich kann, das ist über Islam und wenn jemand will heiraten oder so. Aber darf sehen, ja, und das ist vor Verloben, ja, sitzen mit Mahram oder so. Aber ohne Verloben, ja, das ist natürlich, muss aber 1 oder 2 Mal. Danach Verloben, kann zusammen gehen, sitzen, essen, ja, etwas machen, weil auch sie müssen auch treffen und reden. Und ihr kann was denkt, was sie ja können bestimmt. So, aber ja, natürlich, und auch bei Hijab oder Niqab oder Kleidung auch, das ist verschieden, weil auch jeder Ort anders. Beispiel wie in Ägypten. In Nordägypten nicht wie in Südägypten. Dann haben sie gehört über Nuben, hat andere Kleidung und vielleicht nur tragen, das ist wie Kopftuch, aber ohne Niqab, ohne andere. Das ist auch nicht nur weil auch wie man gar nicht
Khaled, if you let me translate for a second.
Yeah.
So Khaled is joining from Bammental in Germany, and if I understood correctly, he's from Syria. And regarding what you mentioned about the meeting with Mahram, and this is also only possible for a couple of times, and then you have to get engaged, and then steps are taken, and the couple also will get to know each other and be able to spend time and chat. And also we wanted to highlight that in different countries or different regions of the countries, it's different customs and different ways of dressing or wearing the niqab. So depending on which country or which region of a country, either North or South Egypt, it's different.
Yes, that's very true, and it very much depends on if the family are farmers, if they are university educated. It depends on the region, as said. Yeah, on many factors. Yes.
Auch jetzt Beispiel bei Hijab oder jemand muss auch, das ist, weil viele Leute verstehen Kultur falsch. Weil Islam auch sagt, wenn jemand tragt Hijab oder Niqab oder etwas, muss das ist bestimmt denken, dass es, wenn ich denke, das stimmt zu mir, dann ist die Frage, dass es so stimmt. Aber viele Leute machen das oder denken oder wissen, warum das oder warum soll tragen. Und im Islam hat gesagt, keiner muss tragen Niqab. Wie mein Land jetzt oder Beispiel meine Mutter. Sie tragt Hijab, ja, aber meine Schwester hat keine. Das ist auch nicht muss jemand, weil auch Beispiel Leute kommen nach Europa aus muslimischen Ländern oder so, geben auch bestimmte Kultur mit, bei Indischen oder anderen.
So Khaled continued that and highlighting that many misunderstand culture in the part of the headscarf. And he wanted to highlight it's an individual decision actually, and that the Quran doesn't say everyone has to wear it or the women have to wear it. Rather, it is an individual decision. And he says that, for example, his mother wears the headscarf, his sister doesn't. And as they moved to Europe, that's also a way of arriving in a different country and, yeah, blending in or adjusting.
Entschuldigung, auch jetzt Beispiel bei Kuwait. Viele Menschen, viele Frauen, ja, keine Niqab tragen. So musst du reden. Ja. Entschuldigung, ja. Auch bei Kuwait, viele ja, Frauen jetzt keinen Niqab tragen, auch ohne Kopftuch. Das ist bei Zeit, weil auch nicht nur bei Kultur, das ist auch bei Staat oder Regierung, weil auch wenn viele arabische Länder hat diktatorische Regierung und immer das ist keine Länder stimmt, nicht auch kein bestimmt Kontakt oder keine Internet oder keine viele Service. Entschuldigung, auch Beispiel in Afghanistan. Vorher, Taliban ist immer, Frauen soll tragen Niqab und so. Danach kommt andere Staat, das ist mit, ich kann nicht, wie heißt das Bundespräsident, hat Leute, Mädchen ohne Niqab, ohne Kopftuch und danach jetzt, ja, danach jetzt zurück Taliban und sagt, Taliban jetzt muss tragen nochmal. Und viele Länder auch hat Kontakt mit Taliban oder mit anderen und kennen Diktatur und das Problem auch bei demokratischen und anderen. Danke.
Thank you. So he added another example that also the state or the government gives the rules. So he mentioned Kuwait, or as a different example, Afghanistan, where the Taliban were on the rule, so everything was prohibited and women had to cover. And then there was a different government and it was okay to walk around without, and then the Taliban came again. So highlighting the fact that the rules change according to the government or the dictatorship, and it can happen in more democratic and less democratic states as well. Thank you.
Yes. Actually, what he said is very important because each country has its own history. And like, for example, in Iran, there were even anti-veiling laws that under the Shah family before the Islamic Revolution. And women were sometimes forced, the police sometimes forcefully removed the veil of women. Now that, of course, and people have argued that Iran, because it was not colonialized like other countries, that Reza Shah at the time tried to unify Iran, where you had many different people's groups that all wore national dress, and wanted to unify the country so that everybody would kind of wear the same official uniform. He wanted to modernize the country as well. And because Ataturk, who was at the time the ruler of Turkey, was going to visit him, he wanted to show him a modern Iran. And so there were many things coming together that led in Iran to have even anti-veiling laws. And then Iran is then the place that after the Islamic Revolution where the chador was imposed again. But you have many Iranians who protested that and were quite against it. And I'm told that on planes to Iran, there's quite an exchange of clothing that's taking place because many Iranian women we know here in the West do not veil at all, but back home they have to. So there it is imposed by the government. In Egypt, it's not imposed by the government. In Egypt, it's grassroots movement where women, especially in the 1990s, actually, it is said that it's after the defeat of Israel, the war against Israel, Egyptian Muslims, Christians too, wondered what has happened that Egypt lost. And so many turned to religion. And so the veil then became a public expression of that piety. And it's a movement that started in the universities with university students who returned to the veil, even though the mothers don't veil. So in Egypt, you actually often have the case of the opposite of what Khalid tells us, that the mother doesn't veil, but the daughter does veil. So depending on context, it can be quite different. And in Algeria, it's often the freedom fighters who veil to give them a special identity, or maybe to go against French rule because the French had such a imposition of their colonialism in Algeria. So it really very much depends on which context you are in. And each country has its own historical issues when it comes to that. So we always need to keep that in mind. And of course, we always want, of course, to be bridge builders. And we don't want clothing to be in the way, I think, especially us who want to be sensitive to issues of how we relate to Muslims. And that's why I used or tried to use these kind of memes and cartoons to talk about these issues. I think it's time to close now. I hope you enjoyed the memes and the cartoons. It made you laugh a little bit. And I hope you all continue to think of how we can be an embodied witness for Christ. So thank you for attending this workshop.
Thank you very much.